I remember that night as if it were burned into my memory. A night of desire, confusion, and irrevocable decisions that altered my life in ways I never could have imagined. I am Donna, a 51-year-old woman living in a quiet suburb of the USA. It was an evening that began with a simple pleasure of friendship and a few drinks, but it would quickly unfold into a series of events filled with tension, passion, and unforeseen complications. Thank you so much to all our new and returning viewers. Your support is the lifeblood of this channel. I can't wait for you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement means everything to me. Let me introduce you to the key figures of that evening. My husband, Luis, had been my steadfast partner for many years. I cherished our life together, even though deep inside, a sense of loneliness sometimes crept in. Then there was Marc, Luis' best friend, charming, bold, and always the life of the party. Marc had a way of lighting up any room he entered, and his visits were part of our regular routine. That night, as we gathered around in our cozy living room, the atmosphere was relaxed, yet something unspoken stirred beneath the surface. Luis, Marc, and I spent the evening indulging in lively conversation and hearty laughter, sharing wine and casual banter. The familiar clink of glasses and casual jokes filled our home, creating an inviting and relaxed mood. The comfortable ambience of our living room, framed by pictures of happier, simpler times, seemed to promise nothing more than a friendly night in. But even as I laughed and smiled, a part of me felt an unrecognized longing for something beyond the confines of our routine life. As the hours slipped by and the night deepened, the subtle intensity in the air became almost tangible. I sensed that this was no ordinary evening. It was as if fate had set the stage for a moment of vulnerability and unspoken passion. The events that unfolded in that night would soon blur the lines between right and wrong, igniting emotions I had never known and setting me on a path riddled with betrayal and heartache. And so, with this unforgettable memory hovering in my mind, I invite you to join me as I begin to unravel the intricate layers of that fateful night, a night that would forever become a turning point in my life. The evening started like many others. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Luis had invited Marc over to watch the game, and I didn't think much of it. They were best friends since college, closer than brothers really, and it was common for them to drink, laugh, and lose themselves in football. I was used to their banter, the empty beer bottles on the coffee table, and the occasional late-night snooze on the couch when one of them drank too much. It was familiar, almost comforting. That night, I remember the smell of hot wings, the low hum of the television, and the echo of laughter bouncing down the hallway from the living room. I spent the first part of the evening with them, but as the night grew older and their words slurred more, I quietly excused myself and went to bed. I wasn't particularly tired, but I was used to these nights and knew I wasn't needed. Luis barely noticed me leave. He was knee-deep in game stats and shots of bourbon with Marc. I think that's when it started to hit me, not for the first time, that I was beginning to feel invisible. Our marriage wasn't broken, but it had cooled with age. We were more like companions than lovers. He still kissed me goodnight, still brought me coffee on weekends, but the fire had long since faded. And though I never acted on it, I missed feeling desired. I missed the kind of intimacy that used to happen in the middle of the day just because that version of us had disappeared quietly, without warning. As I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, I could still hear their muffled voices. One of them was laughing, Marc, I think. He always had that deep, hearty laugh that carried through walls. I smiled to myself, imagining them toasting another touchdown or arguing over a missed field goal. I was warm, wrapped in my blanket, half drowsy from a glass of wine. I had no idea the night would take a turn that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about loyalty, trust, and myself. There had always been something about Marc. He was one of those men who never seemed to age, fit, confident, always with a sly grin on his lips like he knew something you didn't. I never admitted it out loud, but I had noticed how he looked at me sometimes. Just a little longer than a friend should. But I told myself I was imagining it. He respected Luis too much. I was his best friend's wife, off limits, untouchable. At least, that's what I believed. I eventually drifted off, lulled by the sound of the TV, the weight of silence, and the comfort of knowing my husband was just a few rooms away. But somewhere deep inside me, something stirred. Something that had been waiting, quiet and patient, for the perfect moment to break free. I didn't know it then, but the door I thought was closed had already begun to creak open. And by morning, everything I thought I understood about my life would shatter under the weight of a mistake I could never take back. At approximately 3 a.m., darkness wrapped itself around the house in a suffocating silence. I lay in the quiet of my bedroom, the events of the evening already fading into the haze of slumber, when a sudden, unexpected sensation brought me to attention. In the half-light of sleep, I felt a pair of warm hands gently tugging at the fabric of my underwear. In that vulnerable, sleepy moment, my mind scrambled for familiarity, for something to ground my shaken senses. I convinced myself that it was Luis, my longtime husband, reaching out to comfort me. My body, still stirred by suppressed loneliness and hidden desire, yielded to the gentle caress without hesitation. The ensuing moments were a whirlwind of passion clouded by my groggy state and the soft echo of sounds that I could barely register. I remember the brush of skin against skin, the subtle shift in temperature as care merged with lust, and the deep internal conflict that I tried to dismiss as a dreamlike indulgence. All my emotions were bundled into that single, surreal experience. There was a passionate intimacy that unfolded in a tangle of limbs and whispered gasps, a passionate union that, in the depths of my unconscious, felt both familiar and intensely raw. In the dark, my thoughts were muddled by the remnants of sleep, and I allowed my body to react instinctively to the familiar comfort I yearned for. I felt a mixture of tenderness and a quiet recklessness, not knowing that I was crossing a line I could never uncross. The sensation of closeness, the sound of our combined breaths, and the fleeting moments where desire eclipsed all clarity left me in a state of both ecstasy and terror. I did not have time to question what was happening. I simply surrendered to the raw impulse of the moment, my mind unable to process the depth of betrayal that would later unravel. That night, in the anonymity of darkness and confused intimacy, I unknowingly unlocked a door to a painful secret that would haunt me for decades. The physical pleasure was intense, yet it came tethered to a deep, foreboding sense of dread, a dread that hinted at the irreversible consequences of what seemed, in that hazy moment, like nothing more than a misplaced act of desire. The first fragile light of dawn crept into the room, and with it came a shattering clarity that pulled me from my uneasy sleep. My eyes fluttered open slowly, and the hazy remnants of last night's confusion began to give way to an overwhelming sense of dread. As I sat up in bed, my heart pounded in my chest, urging me to make sense of the disjointed images that swirled behind my eyes. It was then that I saw him, Marc, lying beside me, still silent in the aftermath of our unexpected encounter. The sight struck me like a bolt, and my mind raced to piece together the fragments of what had occurred in the dark. Shock mingled with a deep, aching regret as I tried to recall how events had taken such a bewildering turn. My thoughts churned relentlessly as I slowly got out of bed, each step heavy with the realization that everything I knew was changing. Unable to fully trust my memory, I shuffled silently toward what I assumed would be the bedroom where Luis should be sleeping. Instead, I found him on the living room couch, curled up in an armchair, his face resting in the dim morning light. His soft, even breathing only deepened the surreal quality of the moment, as if the universe had orchestrated a cruel mistake. The discovery of Marc in my bed and Luis in a separate space unleashed a torrent of emotions, bitter betrayal, confusion, and a soul-crushing loneliness that made my knees weak. I sat down in the quiet of the morning, trying to process the irony that the familiar sanctuary of my home had become the stage for such a catastrophic mix-up. As the realization settled in, I felt trapped between a desire to rewind time and the harsh truth that nothing could change what had already happened. Every detail of that night replayed in my mind like a broken record. The dimly lit room, the echo of whispered touches, and the blurred lines of trust that once defined my world. The consequences of that mistaken intimacy were already seeping into every corner of my life. I began to understand that the bonds I had taken for granted were irreparably damaged, and I was left standing alone at the intersection of desire and betrayal. As I sat there, grappling with the morning's revelations, I knew that the coming hours would force me to confront not only the physical aftermath of that confused night, but also the deep emotional wounds that would haunt me for years to come. Now, at the age of 65, the burden of that one fateful night has shadowed every step of my life. Over the past 2 decades, I have carried this secret as both a reminder of what I lost and what I never thought I would be capable of doing. The years have passed with an unyielding heaviness in my heart, a constant struggle between the desire to confess and the terror of shattering the fragile peace of my marriage even further. The routine of daily life has grown into a complex dance of feigned normalcy. Each morning, as I greet the new day, the memory of that night lingers like a bittersweet echo. The emotions I experienced were not just fleeting moments of regret or betrayal. They have ripened into deep layers of sorrow and introspection. I often find myself caught in moments of introspection during quiet hours, questioning every decision and every unsaid word. The guilt, which I try so hard to bury, seeps into my thoughts during unexpected pauses, a smile from Luis, a familiar gesture, or even a nostalgic look in the mirror that reminds me of who I once was. In these quiet reflections, the dilemma intensifies. Do I risk reopening old wounds by confessing to Luis now, hoping for forgiveness and possibly a path toward redemption? Or do I continue to live with this secret, preserving the remnants of a trust that was once unbreakable? The uncertainty gnaws at me, pushing me back and forth between regret and the hope of starting anew with complete honesty. The pain of that night, mixed with a slow passage of time, has rendered every decision a labyrinth of what-ifs and if-onlys. As I navigate this inner turmoil, I realize that my story may not have a clear resolution. Perhaps I will never fully escape the shadows of that confused night, but sharing my truth has been a step toward understanding my own pain and longing for forgiveness. I invite you, dear viewers and listeners, to share your thoughts. What would you do in my situation? Please drop your comments below, and if my story resonated with you, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support fuels this journey, and I truly appreciate every moment you spend with my story.